Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Laura Hodgkiss, and I'm the Event and Training Team Leader here at Staffordshire Chamber of Commerce. And we're delighted today to have Suzanne Davey and Helen with us for our webinar on returning to work, practical hygiene solutions, health and wellbeing in your business. For those of you that don't know, you can speak to us today via the chat function at the bottom and the Q&A. But what I would ask is that you leave all questions to the end of the presentation, just so Suzanne and Helen can get through them as quickly as possible for you. With that in mind, we'll get started, and it's over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you very much, Laura. My name is Suzanne Davey, and my business is the Moreland Contract Cleaning Group, which comprises of contract cleaning, contract janitorial, and also window cleaning. So we're providing services, cleaning services and janitorial services to a very wide range of businesses throughout Staffordshire, Cheshire, East Midlands, and also in Yorkshire. So we're working with organisations such as educational establishments, industrial businesses, distribution centres, leisure premises such as racecourse, a monkey forest. So we've got a lot of experience across a sort of a very broad cross section of businesses and different types of workplaces. Next slide, please, Laura. So the points I'm going to cover this morning is some of the practical steps to consider before reopening your business or your workplace, particularly if it has been locked down since the end of March. We'll talk about some of the how you can keep your workplace clean and sanitised during the working day. Just some of the personal conduct to consider when briefing your staff on return, and some of the hygiene packs that we've been putting into businesses to facilitate their return to work. So things to consider before reopening your premises. So it may have been closed since March, it may have only been partially open, with a number of customers, particularly sort of offices. So they may have had staff in, but they will not have had their regular routine of cleaning. Initially, businesses managers need to carry out a risk assessment to consider the safety of their workers families, and other members of the public, and anybody else who may be visiting those premises. It is very necessary to carry out a deep cleaning of the whole areas. Make sure that the areas are also ventilated well. So if windows and doors have all been shut and locked up for the last 3 to 4 months, then make sure that you ventilate the areas as well as doing the deep cleaning. You need to consider the checking of the heating, ventilating, and in particular the air conditioning units. So if you have contracts with organisations to service those systems, then it is worth considering having those checked before you return. And one of the most important things, if you've got shower facilities within your premises and they have been dormant for the past few months, and also the taps, is to carry out the Legionella controls in making sure that you flush through. And really it is just a case of running the taps for a few minutes, running showers, sanitizing shower heads as necessary, just to make sure that any water that may have been standing within the pipes, particularly whilst we've had some warm weather over the last few months, that is completely flushed out. If anybody does have any particular concern about the Legionella controls, then I'm more than happy to recommend a local organisation that can assist on sort of doing some necessary checks for you. And I think the most important thing is just providing very clear guidance on the social distancing and the hygiene on arrival at your premises, and throughout the conduct throughout the working day. Next slide, please. I mean, in terms of keeping the workplace clean, it is important that you carry out frequent cleaning of the work areas and equipment that's in use between uses. If you don't have a regular cleaning routine, then maybe it is time to consider implementing that. But also, during the normal working day is to consider carrying out frequent cleaning of objects and services that are touched regularly. So we would refer to them as touch points. So door handles, door plates, toilet handles, push buttons on toilets, toilet seats, sinks, taps, plugs, light switches, and also the anything that you may have in terms of the sort of hand sanitizer facilities and sanitizer bottles that you may have that are shared within the premises, that they are sanitized themselves on a regular and routine basis, and also anything that's touched within circulation areas such as handrails, and particularly on staircases and in corridors. One thing we would love all of our customers to adhere to is a clear desk policy. And I know in these days of GDPR, it should be the norm anyway. But if workstations are left completely clear at the end of each working day, then that enables the workstations to be thoroughly cleaned every day. And sanitized. It's important that bins get emptied every day, and that waste is removed to the appropriate skips. And consider limiting or restricting the use of high touched items and shared equipment such as printers. So just give consideration to items within the organisation that are shared, and also one thing I should add it onto that is telephones as well. It's important that our normal routine would be to sanitize telephones weekly, but it's something that should be considered to be done on a daily basis. So in personal conduct for your staff and visitors, number one is the regular hand washing in line with the current WHO guidance, and providing hand sanitizer in multiple locations. So there are sanitizer is now more widely available. There is the urban myth that it has to be alcohol based. It doesn't. We are specialising in the provision of a water-based hand sanitizer, and the important feature of this is it doesn't, with prolonged use, doesn't what we call defat the hands and cause skin problems, which I am aware that a number of people are doing that. So making sure that there is plentiful supply of hand sanitizer, and also obviously the social distancing from colleagues, and that will form part of your risk assessment in terms of looking at where you locate people and making sure that they can maintain social distancing. In our own office here at Daisy Bank House in Cheadle, we've been working all the way through since just after Easter, after the lockdown, but we have put additional measures in place in terms of reorganising the desk configurations, and we've also got perspex screens up in between desks as well, just mainly to give colleagues or to give the staff that sort of extra reassurance. So in addition to your normal daily cleaning routine, it is worth considering where you do have a sort of a fairly heavy footfall within the building and people moving around the building, is to perhaps considering an enhanced or additional cleaning of those busy circulation areas and toilet checks, and we would typically recommend probably about every 3 to 4 hours. So it doesn't have to be done every minute of the day, but perhaps, you know, in a typical 8-hour day, maybe in the morning, mid-morning, and in the mid-afternoon, and certainly around those times that people will have perhaps taken breaks, gone to make coffee, had lunch. So and in between those breaks, making sure those areas do get sanitized. We've talked about frequent waste disposal, and obviously where possible, colleagues should not be sharing equipment. We and providing disinfectant cleaner and paper products for regular cleaning of the workstations and equipment. So as I sort of showed you some of the items, that they can be ready available. So if and I follow that routine when I come in the morning and I've brought my laptop from home, then I will sanitize my laptop, and then I will do a sort of similar regime, even though I'm the only one working at my workstation. The fact that my equipment is sort of being moved from my office to home, then it's a sort of routine to get in, just to make sure that you're kind of keeping it clean, in addition to your own hand washing and hand sanitizing. Next slide, please. So from our janitorial division, we had put together some sanitizing packs or hygiene packs that were designed to help support businesses back to work. So in addition to the deep cleaning and the regular cleaning routines, is a pack with centrifuge rolled cloths, the disinfectant and hand sanitizer. But we are also able to offer a sort of whole wide range of other products as well. So if you do have any sort of specific needs or questions about that, then obviously be happy to do that. And similarly, if you don't have an existing cleaning routine and want some advice and some recommendations for that, then be more than happy to do that with no obligation. And so now I'm going to hand over to Helen Dos Santos, who's going to talk about supporting your sort of teams on their return.
Thanks, Suzanne, and thanks again to Laura. So good afternoon, everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm Helen Dos Santos, and my background is specializing in working with people with mental health issues. So I tend to provide one-to-one support as well as workshops, and that's all designed to build emotional and mental resilience, mental wealth, as I like to call it nowadays, as opposed to mental health. Really just to help your staff flourish, be positive, and actually be able to go about their daily functions in an efficient and productive way. So this afternoon, next slide please, Laura. I'm going to be talking to you about these four main points, but just thinking about the lockdown and the effect that that's had on people, and the emotions are ranging vastly from anything from anger, resentment, guilt, anxiety. Some people will even have experienced fun and enjoyment, particularly if they've been furloughed. And, you know, in April and May, we saw some lovely weather as well. But there's a whole host of emotions going on with people. Now going back into the workplace, whether you're sort of working from home or being furloughed back, for every member of staff, it'll be different, a different experience based on their own personal circumstances. I suppose the question is, are you and your managers prepared for what you might have to be dealing with? And even the best of your managers may be feeling quite vulnerable at the moment themselves, but they're also expected to demonstrate a level of leadership in very unusual circumstances. I don't think any management training program or leadership program would have ever equipped somebody to deal with what we're having to go through now. Next slide, please, Laura. Okay, so just looking at some of the things that people might be experiencing, and I'm going to leave you to read that. I'm not going to rattle those bullet points off, but there could be an element of exhaustion due right through to a buildup of stress. And when I say exhaustion, for people who've been working from home, if they've been working as well as homeschooling children, and they may have had a partner who's also been working from home, and that's presented a different level of dynamics in terms of managing time, and actually could have led to them working a lot longer hours than had they been able to go into the office as normal. For some people, they could be having the experience of going through marriage breakdowns. We've all been at home with our partners for a lot longer than we would have normally. We'd have usually gone away on a two-week holiday or perhaps weekend breaks. To being confined into such a small space for sort of 10 to 12 weeks is, in some cases, could have tested relationships. Some people may be going through bereavements, whether it be related to the virus or otherwise. And given how funerals have been managed recently, that could be quite tragic and almost traumatic for some people to have gone through. So all these things we need to be thinking about. Some of the mental health organisations are really concerned about the more dramatic end of mental health issues. So it could be anything from suicide, and I think there's been some programs on the television recently about people who have taken their lives due to the experience of lockdown, right through to post-traumatic stress disorder, and varying through to feeling withdrawn and almost having that phobia of not wanting to go out anymore, and particularly where people live alone and feel very, very isolated. So there's all sorts of issues that we could, as managers, find ourselves having to face and deal with that we've never had to contend with in the past, or perhaps have not presented themselves in the workplace in the past. One of the other things to bear in mind as well is where you perhaps have staff who have had mild levels of anxiety or depression. Perhaps you or the HR team are not even aware of them because they've been very well managed. Actually, as we've gone through lockdown, those symptoms might have actually increased quite considerably. So you may be finding some of your staff who have been perfectly fine in the past presenting with some issues that are just coming through now as a result of what we've experienced. Laura, next slide, please. It's like being at 10 Downing Street, this is. Okay, so as leaders, managers, what can we do to try and support our staff? I think the first thing is making sure your managers are trained in dealing with mental health issues. I'm just going to mention at this point, I do run a 2-hour workshop, and that can be delivered virtually or face-to-face. But that actually gets managers thinking about what somebody might be experiencing, how to spot the signs and the behavior, as right through to how to have those conversations, which ultimately are quite sensitive, but having them in a very empathetic, sympathetic way, showing the ultimate level of respect, and managers feeling confident in doing that. Now, the workshop that I do run for this is actually can be funded or partly funded through the Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire Skills Hub. You can get up to about 48% of funding through that, so that's one to bear in mind. As I say, managers having the ability to have these conversations are going to be pretty key. Thinking about staff returning to work, so Suzanne's touched on preparing the workplace for bringing them in, and even briefing them about what's expected of them. This is going to feel like coming back into the workplace, having been almost on a long-term sickness basis. So almost reintroducing them back into work is no bad thing. It's quite possible the workplace, if you've had to move desks around, some offices are now putting signs on doors to say how many people can be in a room at a particular amount of time based on the size of the room. So it's almost having that mini induction with staff back into the workplace. And the sooner you start doing that, the better staff will start to feel more secure and become familiar with what that workplace looks like. If you have already embedded in your organization the process of having regular one-to-ones, that's absolutely great. If you don't, and perhaps you're one of those managers who just tends to operate this open door policy for people to come and knock on, chat to you at any time, I would suggest you perhaps do need to introduce these. Where they've perhaps been held monthly, you may need to even consider having them more regularly. And what I would say to you is right now, don't treat everybody the same. Everybody's experience of lockdown will have been different. In those conversations, having a little bit more of a delving, questioning technique to find out how they really are. Just saying to someone, how are you today? Because our stock answers tend to be fine. But you could sort of say, is this a good or a bad day for you? Really try and present the question slightly differently. Again, thinking about your managers, they too might be feeling really, really vulnerable as well. So think about the support you as a business owner or business leader are giving them as well, in order to support the conversations they need to have with their staff. And again, I'm saying one size doesn't fit all. I think in the past we've always talked about fairness and we treat everybody the same. This is one of those times I would tend to say we probably need to treat people a little bit differently, because everyone's experience of the last few months will have been different based on their personal circumstances. So do give that some consideration. And if you can, think about team building activities, try and induce a bit of fun back into the organisation. That is going to help in terms of engaging people again, giving them that sense of belonging, which is actually, you know, when we go to work, we are part of a team. Even if your staff have been working at home for the last few months, they could have felt quite isolated. It's not the same as when you gather around the kettle in the kitchen and you're making a drink and you have that banter. So see if you can think about ways of incorporating something fun and engaging to get that sense of belonging back in with the organisation. And again, I think with the one-to-ones, one thing to perhaps bear in mind is just focusing on how they're feeling, how they're doing. I'm not so sure right now is the right time to be driving in terms of targets and outcomes. I know everybody's anxious to get business up and running again, but that will come. As soon as the staff feel comfortable, safe and engaged, their productivity and energy levels will naturally go up in order to support your business growing once again. Okay, Laura. So just in terms of what managers can do moving forward, we've touched on meeting staff regularly. I think to be aware that some of the things that they might start to be observing, if somebody's experiencing a put my teeth back in, a difficult time, is they could be withdrawing from team colleagues. You might find this conflict during work relationships. If people are being returned into work in a phased approach, if you're not in phase one, you might feel a bit undervalued, might not feel as important. Some people will love it. The longer they're off, the better for some. But there'll be different thoughts and feelings for each person. That could lead to conflicts in work relationships. So again, that might need managing. You might have had really bubbly, outgoing, happy staff who you now notice could be suffering with mood swings. There may be low levels of performance, inability to make decisions, poor judgments with things, or a bit of a reluctance to get involved in any problem solving. So again, there's a lot of issues you could potentially be dealing with. So moving forward, I think that openness is absolutely key. I've put there about keeping staff informed. We're hearing so much now on the news about job losses and redundancies. For anyone who's still furloughed, when you're returning staff back into the workplace, their immediate thought might start to be, does this mean I'm going to be made redundant? So keeping them closely informed is absolutely key. And if it has, if it so happens to be bad news, so be it. But being in the know is better than not knowing at all, because as human beings, we just naturally fill the gaps ourselves, and usually we do it quite negatively. So showing that compassion, respect, and empathy is absolutely critical at the moment. And as I've said, again, treating everybody differently is key. Now, if you're a fairly small business, I have got a couple of things that might help. So one of them is a very simple stress risk assessment. My email will be at the end of this session. So if you'd like a sample of that, please just drop me an email and I'm more than happy to share that with you. Okay, I think we're coming up to the next slide, please, Laura. So just a few tips then in terms of you can apply this to yourself. You know, as business owners, we're not immune to possibly feeling vulnerable in terms of leading our teams as we go forward. So a couple of things that you can start to think about. I think one of the key emotions most people will be feeling is a level of worry, and that can lead right through to anxiety. So if you are sitting down with you, whether it be yourself or with a member of staff, you start thinking about what purpose is that worry serving you. This is just about putting some context to things. Consider whether it's a worthless or a worthwhile worry. And that will help in terms of, is it serving you or not? And does that worry actually just being destructive, or is it empowering you? A few things to really just think through, and you can throw those questions out to anyone who presents a problem with you. That starts with, I'm worrying about. Again, sometimes when I'm coaching people, I get them to think about actually having a worry book and writing a few things down, write their worries down, and actually sit down at a particular time of day to look at that list of worries. And then you go through a series of questions to ask yourself, is it true or is it untrue? 97% of what we worry about never even happens. So very clearly we can quickly identify, have we created a thought to worry about, or is it something that's it is actually true? If it's true, you go on to the next set of questions. Is it solvable or unsolvable by me? And this is about just narrowing it down to whether this worry is within your control to do anything about. So if it's true and it's unsolvable, think about what action you can take. If there's something you can do about it, then get on and do it, because actually that's about taking control and reducing those worry levels down really significantly. And as I say, that feeling of being in control is so key to all of us as human beings. And again, I've got sort of a handout on this. If you want to email me, I'm more than happy to share a document with a little bit more detail on this that you can then use in your organization and share with your staff. And just on one final note, something just to think about as you go away from this afternoon, and I've always believed this to be totally true, but Mayor Angelou actually said, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did for them, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And this is never a more important time to ensure that you make your staff feel valued, safe, and secure. Thank you very much. And so, Laura, I think we're just going on to the questions slide now. And there's mine and Suzanne's email address on there. So, if you've got any queries after the session that as I've mentioned, the two handouts about managing worry and the stress risk assessment, I'm more than happy to share those if anyone wants to drop me an email.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Thank you so much, both of you, for doing that for us, and very thought-provoking with some of it, especially coming out of COVID-19, and very important information as well. So just for those of you that have joined us today, it's now your time to ask any questions that you have for Suzanne or Helen. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes just to pop your questions in the Q&A section. If you do want to put up your digital hand as well, we will be answering questions live. So if you do want to raise your hand and you want to ask a question live, we will allow you to talk at this point, should you want to ask Helen or Suzanne any questions. Suzanne, we do have our first question from Martin Lennon. Would you like me to read it out for you? Oh, you're on mute.
No, I can see the question. Yeah, and I'd previously answered a question when Helen was talking, because Martin asked the question, what exactly was deep cleaning, which I hopefully was able to answer that for him. His question is, if soap and water are not available, CDC recommends consumers use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer that contains at least 60% alcohol. Which sanitizers do you suggest, and what is the basis against COVID? I mean, there are, yes, they do suggest alcohol-based, but there is also science behind the water-based hand sanitizers to say that they work just as effectively. They say alcohol-based, but the science also supports that that water-based hand sanitizers are just as effective against to sanitize hands.
Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you, Suzanne. Brilliant. I'm just going to give it another minute or so. Has anybody got any more questions that they want to ask?
Martin's then said, could I share the science, please? So perhaps if Martin wants to send me an email, and then I'm more than happy to share the science behind that. I noticed, I think, Martin, you've got a medical background, have you? Or you're a medical consultant. So, but yeah, more than happy to share the science with you.
Brilliant. Has anybody else got any more questions? Let's just have a look to check the chat. For those of you that don't know as well, Helen and Suzanne have just popped their details in the chat box as well. So if you do want any of their details, it will be there in the chat box for you. Bear with me. And has anybody got any more questions, just to make sure that we've answered all the questions? It's not a bad thing, by the way, that there's not many questions. That means that you've done a very good job in your presentation today. Oh, we've got one from Catherine. Do you have any suggestions reference to team building activities remotely, please? I think that's for you, Helen.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people doing pub quizzes, or sort of pub type quizzes online, bingo, that sort of thing. There's also things like you can get into mindfulness sessions, but there are quite a few websites that are providing information, and I can certainly send you details on that.
I hope that answers your question, Catherine.
I think one of the things I would like to just add, which is something that Helen and I have talked about in quite a lot of detail, that I appreciate that there is an anxiety or a fear, or just sort of the guidance in saying keeping the workplaces shut. If you can work at home, stay at home, etc. But I think that we are fast approaching the point where I think we need to start socializing again. I appreciate there are guidelines and restrictions on that, but I think we have seen such a significant increase in the productivity and efficiency within our teams when we brought them back into the workplace, albeit with the restrictions in place. And I think there is a danger that that organizations are not being as productive and efficient because the people are working remotely and and sort of somewhat fragmented. So I think it's reopening the workplaces, making sure from a practical point of view and a health and safety point of view, the workplace is ready to get people back to work. And as Helen's talked about, the sort of support mechanism that you can put in place to help people but get back to work. But I think it is really important for your businesses and also for the economy going forward that we have to take things to that next step and really start returning workplaces and businesses to some sort of normality.
I think building on that, Suzanne, as well, I know organisations where they can't have everybody back. They just haven't got the space. So what they're starting to do is bring perhaps 50% of the workforce back.
Yes.
Monday and Tuesday, and then the other 50% come in Thursday, Friday. And so it's on a rotating basis, and not everybody feels they have to work at home.
And that's been the approach that a lot of the schools have taken with bringing their pupils back in their sort of bubbles. But the conversations I'm having with the schools now for September is ultimately some of the schools approaching it that the school is going to be just one big bubble, and they'll, you know, they have to be able to get everybody back and get them educated again. Then you know, it's going to be necessary, I think, to, you know, to do that. But there was an interesting article in the Daily Mail today where they were talking about productivity levels, and that somebody who'd maybe worked 32.5 to 40 hours a week within the workplace is now working from home. But the reality is they're probably only working about 24.5 hours a week. So actually probably just working 3 days a week instead of the full 5 days a week. So that's just something that to bear in mind also as well, in terms of you know, in terms of sort of getting things back to where we need to.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you both. Very interesting. Suzanne, Martin's got another question for you. Do you want me to?
Okay. So let me see.
That's right.
He's asked the question, I think it's a key to a safe workplace is to have hand washing on entering the buildings before touching any surfaces. Do I agree? Well, I certainly don't disagree. It is part of the guidelines, but it is where it is practical. So not every workplace can install hand washing facilities on entering the building, but they're certainly the guidance that we give to our staff is that they on arriving at work is wash their hands as soon as they can practically, and use hand sanitizer, wear gloves during the course of their work. So yeah, I understand what he's saying, but you know, you have to also offset the guidance with what is practical and also reasonable.
Wonderful, fantastic. And I think that's all of the questions for today. Yes, it is. Fantastic. Suzanne and Helen, thank you so much for today. I really appreciate it. For all of you that have attended today, or you jumped in, I know a couple of you jumped in a little bit later than the start time. We do have a recording of this webinar, and it will be on the Chamber's website. So please look out for that in the next couple of days. And anybody that you think would appreciate sharing that out and just watching it and getting some information about returning to work safely for both physically, for cleaning purposes, and for your mental health. I want to thank you both again very much for being here today. And
for having us.
Not a problem. And look after you both, and stay safe, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you all very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks. Bye.